The GAA Museum remembers Bloody Sunday. Welcome to the 6th in our series of Mondays at the Museum playbacks. This recording is of a lecture given by myself, Dr. Siobhan Doyle, titled Commemorating Conflict, Remembering Bloody Sunday and Difficult History, which was recorded live on Microsoft Teams. I hope you enjoy the lecture. So I've split this lecture into two sections, and the first presents practices of commemorating Bloody Sunday in chronological order from 1920 onwards, alongside broader practices of remembering difficult history. And then the second part looks at material traces of Bloody Sunday, so the stuff left over, things that have been collected, that have been safeguarded and conserved for the past 100 years. So I want to start with the immediate aftermath of Bloody Sunday, so the days after the tragedy, and how people processed and began to engage in practices of remembrance very soon after Bloody Sunday took place. So on the Monday morning afterwards, mourners gathered at Croke Park to pray at the exact spot where Michael Horan was shot down. Now, we've no records of who these people were, if they had any connection to Michael Horan, or if they attended the match the day before, or if they were locals who came to pay their respects. But there is pervasive evidence that we believe that the ground we walk on holds the contents of its history. So it offers us direct access to what has occurred there. And perhaps one of the reasons people came to Croke Park the day after Bloody Sunday was to be present at the site, both as individuals and as members of a group of mourners. Now, the news of Hogan's death was wired by the Tipperary captain, Ned O'Shea, on the Monday morning, so that this was almost a full 24 hours after his death occurred. Reverend Father O'Leary and Father Fitzgerald, curates from the local area, were tasked with breaking the news to Michael's death to his mother, Mrs. Hogan, in Grange Mokler. And this act of mourning at the site of Hogan's death in Croke Park, this practice of commemoration, was happening in advance of Hogan's own family being notified of his death. So ownership over how Hogan was being remembered was already with the public before his family had even known he was gone. And this flocking to sites of atrocity in its immediate aftermath is a regular practice. So, for example, if we think back to how in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, thousands of people went to the Pentagon because they felt they had to do something in the days after September 11th, and the site became its focal point. Many came to burn images in their mind and to try to comprehend what felt so incomprehensible. And through sight, sound, touch, feel and smell, through these 5 rivers of sense, visitors could begin to reach towards experiencing the reality of an atrocity. And this desire to be in the company of others who also turn their hearts and minds towards the events is what draws people to these sites. People sense that their lives had been changed forever, and this perspective and their need to be witness to it united them, even if other aspects such as their politics or religion or culture divided them. And the site of death may well serve as the tombstone to make people feel nearer the dead person. So since Michael Hogan had no grave yet, this spontaneous site of mourning on the field at Croke Park provided a place where people could feel close to him, where they could still feel his presence. After all, it was the last place that Hogan had been alive. So people come to the sites of atrocity to bear witness to the tragedy, to show that they care and respect for the dead, and to signal their intent to remember. And the same goes for funerals. Funerals confirm death. Now, Hogan's body was identified by his second cousin, Father Patrick Brown, in Jervis Street Hospital. His remains were removed from here on Tuesday to St. Mary's Croke Cathedral, where they lay overnight. They were then convoyed from Dublin to Clonmel by train on Wednesday. The coffin, draped in tricolour, was taken in a hearse to the parish church in Grange Mokler, where it remained overnight. Now, the coffin was fitted with a glass lid so that the body could be viewed. Now, while glass lids are unusual nowadays, they were a feature of coffins around this time, especially those of notable figures in Irish politics and society. So here we see a photo of Irish Fenian leader Jeremiah O'Donovan Rossa when he was lying in state in 1915. His funeral, of course, was a demonstration of nationalism and an operational dry run for the 1916 Rising. Hogan was dressed in the Tipperary kit. This was not his own. It was given by a member of the team, Jack Hickam, and he was buried in the family plot along with his father, aunts and their grandparents. The following Sunday, the 28th of November 1920, was proclaimed by the South Tipperary County Board a blank day in Hogan's memory. So this is a photograph from 1921 of the Tipperary team gathered around the spot where Michael Horan perished just prior to the refixed Bloody Sunday match, which Tipperary won 5-3 to no score. Mick Salmon, who refereed the Bloody Sunday match, again refereed this encounter. And you can see here the Tipperary team wearing black armbands in memory of those who died. And the Tipperary team would recreate this ritual when they won the All-Ireland title 2 years later. Each participant in that refixed Bloody Sunday match received a commemorative gold medal. These medals were also presented to players in the 75th anniversary tournament in Thurles in 1995. And the inscription on the back of the medal reads, presented by the Irish National Assurance Company 1921 anniversary tournament. The Irish National Assurance Company, or the New Ireland Assurance Company Limited, was established in the early 1900s as the first Irish-owned life assurance company to transact business in Ireland. The company's genesis lies in the national resurgence of the 1916 era, and many of its founders took place in the 1916 Rising. The Irish National Assurance Company had a close association with the GAA. Though working in different spheres, both were akin in ideals. They were both striving for a future with Irish identity and culture at the core, and with a dedication to ensure that its values enrich the lives of its members, families, and communities. And in 1929, the Irish National Assurance Company presented the National Football League Cup to the GAA. Now, there are limited visual representations of Bloody Sunday. As Ciara Chambers noted in an earlier lecture in this series, there was no cinema newsreel coverage of Bloody Sunday, not only because there was none taken, as it was such an impromptu event, but because it was problematic for the biased British production companies, as it implicated the Crown forces and it would not have fit with the pro-British agenda. Yeats, one of Ireland's most prolific painters, painted Singing the Dark Rose Lee in Croke Park, which was painted a year after the events of Bloody Sunday. Yeats went frequently to hurling matches in Croke Park, and he often recorded these in his sketchbooks. The painting shows a fiddler flanked by two singers holding centre stage among the crowd, who have cleared a space for them. There is a sense of solemn ritual in the painting, and in the foreground, a girl with a basket on her arm, probably a flower seller, turns to listen along with a little boy in a cap. Now, My Dark Rosaleen is an Irish patriotic song which is used as a poetic symbol for Ireland. It plays to the nationalist stereotype of Ireland as a beautiful feminine figure. So this painting is an interweaving of ballad, painting, sport and politics. The painting was sold by Christie's auction house in 1999 for an estimated £150,000 to £250,000 to an anonymous buyer. It remains in a private collection and was on display in the National Gallery of Ireland for its Creating History exhibition in 2016. So in a repeat of the Bloody Sunday fixture, the All-Ireland final of 1922 was Tipperary versus Dublin. And this was actually the 1920 All-Ireland, but was played 2 years later because of the violence during the War of Independence. And Dan Breen, an Irish volunteer and Fianna Fáil politician from West Tipperary, threw in the ball for that match. Special sideline seats were reserved for, among others, a number of wounded men of the IRA, some of whom figured prominently on the hurling and football fields before the war broke out. Now, Tipperary won that encounter, and it would be the last time that they would win the title or appear in an All-Ireland football final. And the romantic notion of a replay of the 1920 All-Ireland football final between Dublin and Tipperary in this already remarkable championship season, 100 years on from Tipperary's last senior victory, is still very much alive. Actually, as is the semi-final pairings of 1920, which were Tipperary versus Mayo and Cavan versus Dublin. So we'll wait and see. So at GAA Congress in 1925, Roddy Nealon, who was chairman of the North Tipperary GAA, proposed that a suitable statue with bronze bust be erected near the main entrance to Croke Park to the memory of Michael Hogan, and that one of the stands be named the Hogan Stand. The Cork County Secretary, Mr. Barry, seconded this motion and suggested that the statue be made of different material so that the memorial could be of Irish manufacture. The Dublin chairman suggested that the names of the other victims be included in the memorial, and Mr O'Ruan, chairman of the Connacht Council, suggested a postponement until they had a proper main entrance to Croke Park and until Central Council had sufficient funds to erect a memorial that would be worthy of young Hogan. General O'Duffy supported this and suggested that the naming of the stand be proceeded without delay. The motion was unanimously approved in 1926, and the Hogan stand was named with a plaque unveiled. And I suppose it's notable that Michael Hogan had a stand named in his memory before Maurice Davin or Frank Dineen, who were pivotal figures in the early operation of the GAA and its development. In 1928, a white marble monument was erected by the GAA to Michael Hogan at the family plot in the cemetery in Grangemokler. The local clergy objected to the reference in the inscription that he was shot by Crown forces, but their reservations were overcome. It was unveiled by Liam Clifford, a former president of the GAA, and the Gaels of Ireland forwarded subscriptions towards the erection of the memorial, for which Jerry Shelley, Hogan's Grangemokler and Tipperary teammate, was mainly responsible. Now, this is a substantial monument, especially when compared with other monuments in the graveyard and with the subtle Celtic cross erected by the family. The GAA's marble statue is in opposition with the family one. Firstly, it's at the opposite side of the plot to the family monument. Now, this may be to do with the positioning of Hogan's remains within the plot itself. But secondly, it faces in the other direction to all of the other monuments in the Churchill. And finally, it's the GAA monument that is the focus when commemorating Hogan in Grangemokler, which we'll see later on in some of the photographs to follow. Now, there are other examples of monuments erected by the GAA at family plots which sort of overshadow or almost undermine the modest monuments erected by their next of kin. One such example is a stone at Killery in Lobanstown, County Meath, which was erected by Meath GAA after Tom Keegan died of an injury sustained when he was playing for his local GAA club in a football match in 1940. The Meath Senior Football Trophy is named in his honour, and his parents are marked on a smaller headstone on the same plot, and there's also another stone for other family members. Now, throughout the 1930s, 40s and 50s, there were many commemorative ceremonies at Croke Park to mark Bloody Sunday on its anniversary weekend. Prayers were recited on the spot where Hogan died, and the last post sounded, and matches between the Tipperary and Dublin football teams became an annual tradition. The Horan Cup, named after Michael, is awarded to the Minor A football champions in Tipperary, and it was presented to the Tipperary County Board by the Tipperary Association in 1958. Now, that's not to be confused with the other Horan Cup presented to secondary schools, which is named after Michael's brother. A new trophy was presented in 2012, and in 2019, Grangemokler, bearing the name of Michael Hogan on its crest, won that cup. Now, 1959 saw the opening of the new Hogan stand at Croke Park. The entire of the work on the Hogan stand was carried out by Irish Labour, with the contractors Thomas McInerney and Sons Limited using entirely Irish material. The old Hogan stand was re-erected in the Ennis Road ground in Limerick, which is now known as the LIT Gaelic grounds. Now, Grangemokler continued to hold its own commemorations, which largely adhered to the format of a religious service, speeches and the laying of wreaths at the graveside. It's notable that these ceremonies and photographs took place at the GAA monument, not the family one. So the focus here appeared to be on the GAA's mourning of Hogan rather than the family's. And during these commemorative years, the Bloody Sunday generation were aware of its own mortality and felt the need to ensure that future generations understood its legacy. The Bloody Sunday tournament, it was much more than just a commemorative gesture or an annual tradition. O'Mara notes how in 1969 the game was played the Sunday before the Tipperary County final between Ardfinnan and Clonmel Commercians, and in a measure of the importance of the Bloody Sunday tournament, certainly to the Tipperary team, 5 players involved in that county final played in the game against Dublin with the full backing of their clubs. And in 1967, when the tournament match at Croke Park was a draw, it was replayed in Clonmel the following week. And the Nationalists report how Tipperary's win in that replay was the county footballers' first senior trophy in 32 years. Now, on the 50th anniversary in 1970, Mass was celebrated in Grangemokler and a commemorative plaque at the church gate was blessed and unveiled. And that plaque can still be seen there today. Wreaths were laid at Hogan's grave on behalf of the Hogan family, the Tipperary County Board and the people of Grangemokler. So here we have 3 agents involved in the official commemorations: the family, the GAA and the local community. Now, there's limited information on public commemorations of other victims. A plaque to Daniel Carroll was unveiled in his native Temple Derry last year on the wall of the community centre in the local GA grounds in Tipperary. And in the coming weeks, a memorial to Wexford man Thomas Ryan will be unveiled at Oilgate GA grounds. Now, in 1970, apologies for this grainy image, but in 1970 these 2 plaques were unveiled on the beams of the Hogan stand, and they were written as Gaeilge, and one plaque named the victims and the other named the members of both the Tipperary and Dublin teams. So here, for the first time as well, the victims are named together in an official memorial. Now here, 13 victims are listed, with Tom Hogan, who died in hospital the following Friday of the injuries he sustained. He was omitted from this memorial, and it's telling that the victims are given the exact same visibility as those who played on the Dublin and Tipperary teams. Victims here are given equal space to the survivors. This memorial is incorrect, as it cites Joseph O'Dua instead of Patrick O'Dowd or Padraig O'Dua. So it got his name wrong, which is a terrible mistake, which misrepresents a lost life. Now, later that Sunday afternoon in 1970, a ceremony was again held at the spot where Hogan died. The chaplain of the Dublin Brigade of the IRA, Reverend Tom Walsh, recited A Decade of the Rosary on the field, and RT broadcaster Eamon de Barra gave an oration in Irish and English, and the Artane Boys Band sounded the last post. Now we're fast forwarding here to 1995, which is the 75th anniversary, and the Tipperary footballers took on All-Ireland champions Dublin in Thurles. Tommy Carr, who played for the Dublin footballers, and his brother, Declan Carr, who played for the Tipperary footballers, are the only 2 brothers to win All-Stars for 2 different counties. And their grandfather threw in the ball for that match. He was over 100 years old. So why did this commemorative match, which was an annual fixture in the GA calendar, cease in the 1990s? Perhaps the fixture had just run its course. But it is possible that it stopped because of the gap between Tipperary and Dublin footballers became too large, and the games were missing that competitive edge. The fact that the 100th commemorations were originally planned to be marked to coincide with the international rules fixture suggests that this may have been a factor in deciding not to resurrect the traditional football match between Dublin and Tipperary. So I now want to move focus to the many memorial plaques to Bloody Sunday that have been erected in Croke Park and in Tipperary. And memorials offer a form of immortality for those who've died, as well as the possibility of a continuing link between those who have gone and those who remain. The common thread is that memorials provide a focus for social transition and a link between the living and the dead. And in 1995, this plaque was unveiled in Semple Stadium. So here we see Thurles inserting itself into the commemorative space around Bloody Sunday, but doing so in a way that places the players on the Tipperary and Dublin teams at the forefront of the memorial rather than the victims. So by naming the players on both teams in the memorial and making only a cursory reference to any of the victims other than Hogan, this plaque commemorates the match rather than the tragedy itself. There are more recent memorial plaques to Bloody Sunday at the Hogan stand in Croke Park. Now, the photo of there on the left hand side was taken in 2010 of Uachtaráin Christy Cooney laying a wreath, and this memorial mentions 13 victims with the omission, again the omission of Tom Hogan. The photo on the right, which is of the present plaque, which includes 14 victims, the starting 15 on both teams, and the referee Mick Salmon. Now, the combination of these names on the memorial plaques, different and similar at the same time, tends to cancel out any individual differences and presents the viewer with only one face, one general type, instead of a multitude of individuals. So what does it mean to read a name? On one hand, it signals the life of the individual, but on the other hand, it is a shallow evocation of their presence. The centenary has brought a renewed desire to memorialise the dead with images, objects, stories, details and specifics, precisely because of the way in which the name provides only an empty shell of remembrance. So it's here that I want to move on to the second part of the lecture, which focuses on the material traces of Bloody Sunday. Michael Foley's recently published second edition of The Bloodied Field, Croke Park, Sunday 21st November 1920, described how Annie Burke drifted across the field and draped her coat around the body of Michael Hogan, who lay dead on the ground near Hill 16. This was a fearless act, given the danger which absorbed the National Stadium that afternoon. Annie herself left the field unscathed, aside from a piece of glass which cut her face. And the glasses worn by Annie were damaged by a ricocheting piece of grit, and she never wore them again. They were never repaired or cleaned and remained in their case in this disfigured condition, and they were donated to the GA Museum last year. Now, this is the cap that Billy Kennedy, a Tipperary man from Silvermines, wore to the Bloody Sunday match, and he had a very lucky escape. A bullet passed through the peak of the cap, thankfully not connecting with his head. The cap was kept in the family home and is now in the possession of Billy's son, whose mother kept the cap safely and proudly showed it off to any visitors. Now, damaged but not completely broken, these artefacts act as metaphors for the hundreds of people who suffered the consequences and traumatic memories of that day for many years that followed. Almost 100 years on from Bloody Sunday, these artefacts have now entered the public realm. The circulation of the glasses and the cap are closely related to the type of emotional value ascribed to them. And this is evident through the processes of keeping them in private homes and passing them down through generations, and bringing them into the public setting and inviting them to be viewed by a broader audience marks a phase in the transition from individual and private grief to communal commemoration. Their entering into the public domain also reflects a conscious willingness to wish to conserve the memory and the legacy of the darkest day in GA history by having them displayed in a museum. Now, many of these objects were donated by family members who safeguarded them for generations and without asking for anything in return, and the GA Museum cherishes them. Football that's said to have been used on Bloody Sunday still exists as a material reminder of that day. It was picked up by a young Jack Loughran who was attending the match with his father. Jack Loughran left all of his GAA and other historical memorabilia to his brother-in-law Tommy O'Dowd in the late 1990s, and by descent it was passed on to Tommy O'Dowd Jr. The football went to auction at Adams in April 2009, and in advance of the auction, the Adams website read, "Unique memento of Bloody Sunday 1920, Tipperary versus Dublin, an original laced leather football said to have been used at Croke Park during the Memorial Football Challenge match." Now, Unpusheen Still in Rathcoole acquired the ball, and this pub promotes itself as a museum pub and holds many pieces of sports memorabilia, including a medal from the first All-Ireland final in 1887 and Katie Taylor's boxing gloves. And the display of the ball and accompanying information on their website reads, "Unpusheen Still holds the ball that was used during the Dublin versus Tipperary Gaelic football match." So suddenly the ball has jumped from said to have to that was used, and unequivocally stating in the display that the football was the exact one that was used that day is problematic. So without concrete evidence of the provenance and authenticity of artefacts, museums and public spaces should avoid presenting historical information with absolute certainty. Of course, it's difficult to authenticate artefacts from 100 years ago, but by presenting uncertain information as undisputed, definite historical information, we seriously risk misrepresenting the past. And this is a real concern across many museums, and I've written about this in relation to objects associated with the 1916 Rising and World War I. The Museum of Hidden History in Clonmel holds what they present as the jersey owned by Tipperary Gaelic footballer Michael Horan. It's important to note how the display label does not say that it is the jersey worn by Horan on Bloody Sunday or at another stage, but that it was owned by him. That's because it is unlikely that that is the jersey that was worn by Horan on Michael Sunday, although myth seems to have taken over, and it's often perceived as a contact relic, a piece of clothing that he wore when he was shot dead. The condition of the jersey doesn't correlate with the circumstances of his death. So in order to comprehend the appearance of the jersey and how it coincides with the details of Hogan's death, I consulted with colleagues in Royal Armouries in Leeds, which is the custodian of the UK's National Collection of Arms and Armour. Jonathan Ferguson, who's Keeper of Firearms and Artillery, and Lisa Traynor, Curator of Firearms, stated how the jersey is remarkably clean and noted how you would expect at least some blood on the jersey from the exit wounds caused by the .303 rifles fired. Andre Horn, who works in firearms and tool marks at Eurofin Scientific, remarked how he would expect blood on a jersey like that if Hogan had been shot and lay bleeding on the ground, which was the case. The blood from rifle wounds drains out through the hole when someone is lying down, so a shot that killed him is expected to result in visible blood on the jersey. In a recent History Ireland podcast, James Sutcliffe from the Museum of Hidden History in Tipperary stated, and I quote, "We are of the conclusion that it was not the jersey that Hogan died in, but that is not to say that he did not own it, as it was a Grange Mokler jersey. That is a complete conjecture on our part, and we have no way of proving. That is the nature of these kind of events. Things get legs. We can actually categorically say that he did not die in the jersey, but that is not to say that it is not a spare or something or connected to him in some form," unquote. So there we have it. The most famous tangible reminder of Bloody Sunday, displayed to the public for the last 40 years, has a more secondary and abstract connection to the 21st of November 1920, instead of the immediate connection as previously understood. So in an effort to bestow the jersey with a remarkable connection to Michael Horan, the martyr of Bloody Sunday, its actual provenance has been somewhat blurred and distorted. So in order to gain a deeper understanding of the jersey, and the history of the jersey, I wanted to delve deeper into information on the donation of the jersey and its display history. But unfortunately, that information is quite limited. And this is in line with the nature of the archival material and less self-conscious museum practices, which thankfully for us historians has changed in recent years with meticulous documentation procedures now in place. So the jersey was on display during the first Féile na Gael in 1971. It was donated to the Tipperary County Museum in 1979 by the Ryan family. And in this photo is Tommy Ryan, whose father, also called Tommy Ryan, was secretary of the Tipperary South Board and a selector on the team on that fateful day. When Michael Hogan was shot and killed, it left his mother, Mrs. Hogan, very much trying to fend for herself. Tommy managed to get her extra rations and helped her out. The story goes that she gave Tommy this jersey in return for him taking care of her. Tommy died quite young and the jersey stayed in the family home in a drawer up until the time it was donated to the Tipperary Museum. The jersey was conserved in 2016. The main aim of conservation treatment is not only to improve the appearance of the object, but also to prolong its life and prevent deterioration. The cleaned jersey today can be viewed as near as possible to its original condition when Michael Hogan was its owner. The jersey represents Hogan in his glory as an inter-county footballer. And since its donation to the Tipperary Museum in 1979, it's never come off display, which is a testament to its power as a historical object. There is a stark contrast between the long display history of Hogan's jersey and the damaged glasses which have been displayed for the first time in 2019, and the bullet-ridden cap, which has never been displayed outside of the family home. Quite often, bloodstains and soils are maintained in historical objects so that they can function as both a remainder and a reminder of what has come to pass, both evidence and memory. Think of James Connolly's bloodstained shirt and Michael Collins's coat with mud splatters from Bale na Blah in the National Museum of Ireland, or Jacqueline Kennedy's Chanel suit stained with the blood of the assassinated President Kennedy from 1963. And Landy calls these types of soils and stains holy dirt, which has become part of the history of the objects because it helps to contextualize them. Now, this is a photograph of the display of the present Bloody Sunday exhibition in the GA Museum. And in the middle, we see the coat that Tom Hogan wore when he was shot in Croke Park on Bloody Sunday. Now, Tom's arm was amputated due to the damage done by the bullet wounds to his shoulder, and he died in hospital a few days later. Now, there's a patch on the right shoulder of the coat where the bullet damage was repaired afterwards. Now, that his coat was cleaned, that the bullet hole was patched, and that the blood stains were erased is telling of the desire to wipe away any visible traces of the trauma of that day. Deciding whether to repair a textile is influenced by a sense, whether consciously or unconsciously expressed, of what the piece should be like. Michael Hogan's jersey and Tom Hogan's coat were cleaned and repaired, but the objects belonging to the survivors, such as the glasses and cap, remain untouched, and the holy dirt endures. These objects are all examples of how personal belongings become transferred into cherished memorabilia, mystical embodiments of those present in Croke Park on Bloody Sunday. So now I'd like to point towards the way the centenary of Bloody Sunday and anticipation of it has fostered new paradigms in commemorating that day. Firstly, the centenary has encouraged more visual representations of the 21st November 1920. This is David Sweeney's oil on canvas painting, Transilience, which was commissioned by the GA Museum and poignantly captures the streetscape on Jones's Road in 1920 with present day match crowds. The colour and the vibrancy of match day is contrasted with the dark presence of the artilleries approaching the stadium on Bloody Sunday. And the match day supporters are completely unaware of this looming presence on the canvas, just like those in Croke Park on Bloody Sunday were. Now, the centenary has also brought about other types of visual representations of Bloody Sunday. The Revolution papers, this is a chronicle of the events that brought about Ireland's independence, bringing readers the most important newspapers from that time, reprinted as they appeared. Each edition provides a comprehensive selection of full-size facsimile newspapers and a colour visual on the front page. And the other image here is the cover of a French graphic novel which tells the story of Bloody Sunday through the lens of Antoine, a Frenchman in Dublin during the 2007 Six Nations rugby tournament. The novel floats between the turmoil of the War of Independence in Dublin in 1920 with the excitement of sporting history being made in Croke Park in 2007. So the killings on the morning of Bloody Sunday are bookended by depictions of the dramatic encounter between the Irish and English rugby teams amid the tension over the British national anthem being played at the exact site of an atrocity caused by Crown forces. So with regards to existent visual references such as the structure of the stadium, its dressing rooms and streetscapes in Dublin City, the graphic novel pays remarkable attention to detail, but this is overshadowed by the final image in the book, which oversimplifies the narrative of Bloody Sunday in order to streamline the tragedy of 1920 with a rugby tournament, albeit a momentous one. The final image in the book depicts the victims of Bloody Sunday standing in the present-day Croke Park with the lyrics of Ireland's Call headlining across the page as Tipperary footballer Michael Horan hoists a rugby ball above their heads. And this is a callous image given the complicated and tragic events of that day, but such is the nature of this genre of visual language. And like any moment in history, it's very difficult to narrate a story through a set of sequential image panels, but nevertheless, using a graphic novel as a new media of storytelling attracts broad new audiences, and in this case, a more global readership. Now, these are 14 drawings of the victims of Bloody Sunday. Again, these were by artist David Sweeney. This is from the present exhibition in the GA Museum. These drawings are based on photographs of the victims where possible, and otherwise they use actors from the series of short films that you may have seen disseminated across GA platforms over the last number of weeks. So as noted by Richards and Dawson, when viewed, photographs can become a focus for emotional release and a vehicle for negotiating a social bond. They also connect us materially and emotionally and memorially with the deceased person. And now that we have these visual representations of each individual victim, we can use them to form a connection and a bond. These new practices of commemoration have shifted the social status of the victims, who until now, the emphasis had been on the manner of their death rather than focusing on their lives. Now, more than 90 years on, 8 of the 14 people killed on Bloody Sunday lay in unmarked graves for a variety of different reasons. The cemetery contain grave markers that describe characteristics of a deceased person's life and dates of birth and death. Thus, the sites carry the purpose of enshrining the identity of the deceased as an individual. Any personal significance or individuality of the victims of Bloody Sunday was repressed by restricting distinctive identities to those who could afford a headstone. In 2015, the GA Bloody Sunday Graves Project began as the association in conjunction with Michael Foley and the support of Glasnevin Trust, and they undertook to verify the final resting places, make contact with the victims' relatives and provide assistance where needed to erect headstones and markers on these graves. As is the case in most graveyards at the turn of the 20th century, only the wealthier deceased are commemorated with permanent memorials, and the vast majority of those buried there would have been too poor to afford anything other than an impermanent grave marker. As outlined earlier, Hogan's resting place draws a substantial number of mourners and is the site of very public events. This contrasts with the subsequent privacy of the other victims buried in unmarked graves, whose location until recent years was known only to those who attended the funeral. And gravestones can serve as tools for the presentation of self and identity. Through choice of language for the inscription on these stones, in particular the mention of Bloody Sunday, the deceased become anchored in this particular event. These gravestones are not placed side by side in the cemetery, but their appearance, similar in form, size and inscription, taken together assemble the victims with a common identity belonging to the events of Bloody Sunday. And to conclude, commemoration is always selective and it reflects what society wants to remember. So from tracing the practices of commemoration around Bloody Sunday from 1920 until its centenary, it's clear that there is now a more balanced remembrance of all of those who met a tragic end, as they did what many of us long to do right now, go to a match on a Sunday afternoon. Gur míle maith agaibh.